Moments before stepping onto the Las Vegas Hilton stage in November 1976, Elvis reached into his jacket pocket and froze. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper, drawn in a child's shaky hand. It read, "For Daddy." It was from Lisa Marie. What he did next left 20,000 people in complete silence. Las Vegas Hilton, November 29, 1976. The night air outside shimmered with neon and desert heat. Inside, the showroom pulsed like a living heart. Nearly 20,000 people filled the seats, their voices rising in waves. Cameras flashed. Security whispered into earpieces. The king was running late again. Backstage, Elvis sat alone in front of a mirror rimmed with yellow bulbs. His reflection looked both familiar and distant. Eyes tired, hair perfectly set, the famous white phoenix jumpsuit glittering beneath the lights. He adjusted the high collar, took a slow breath, and tried to steady his shaking hands. Charlie Hodge poked his head in. 5 minutes, Elvis nodded without turning. "Thanks, Charlie." His voice sounded thin. He looked down, searching for something. His lucky scarf, maybe a ring he'd forgotten to wear. Instead, his fingers brushed against something soft in his jacket pocket. He frowned. It wasn't fabric. It was paper, folded, worn. He pulled it out slowly. The edges were yellowed, the folds smoothed from years of being handled. Inside, drawn in crayon, was a small figure holding a guitar taller than itself. Next to it, another figure smiling, arms wide. Above them, a child's handwriting trembled across the page. "Love you, Daddy. Lisa." The room went silent, as if time itself had leaned in to look. Elvis blinked hard. For a moment, he wasn't at the Hilton. He was back at Graceland, watching his little girl draw on the carpet with her tongue poking out in concentration. She had handed him that picture before his last tour, saying, "Keep this close so you don't forget me." He had laughed then, tucked it into his jacket, and never thought of it again. Until now, the crowd outside began to chant, "Elvis! Elvis! Elvis!" The sound grew louder, echoing through the walls. The vibration shook the table where his rings and scarves lay. He stared at the drawing, his thumb brushing over the crayon lines. The tiny blue sky, the uneven sun. The simplicity of it hit him harder than any lyric ever had. He whispered, "How did you end up here, little one?" Charlie knocked again. "Boss, curtains ready." Elvis didn't answer. His chest felt tight, and for a second he thought he might not go on. The paper trembled in his hand. He could hear the orchestra warming up, the low hum of strings, the cough of the brass section, the muted buzz of the crowd. He folded the drawing carefully, slid it back into his pocket, and pressed his palm against it like it was something sacred. As he stood, a quiet resolve washed over him. He had performed through pain, exhaustion, heartbreak, but never with a heart this exposed. He reached for his microphone, looked toward the stage curtain, and murmured, "All right, Lisa, let's do this one together." The stagehand called out, "Stand by, King entering." The lights dimmed. The opening notes of Also Sprach Zarathustra thundered through the hall. The crowd erupted. But behind that curtain, Elvis wasn't thinking of fame or flashing cameras. He was thinking of a crayon drawing, a promise, and a little girl waiting back home. He stepped forward, the noise hitting him like a wave. Then he stopped. Something inside whispered, "Not yet." He turned back toward the wings, gripping the microphone tighter, heart pounding. Because suddenly, he knew this night wasn't going to be like any other. What would you have done if you were him? Go on as if nothing happened, or let your heart decide? Backstage lights flickered. A faint hum from the speakers filled the corridor. Elvis leaned against the wall, that folded drawing burning against his chest like a secret he wasn't ready to share. He unfolded it again. The paper trembled in his hands. Crayon colors had bled faintly into one another. Pink sun, crooked house, blue sky that didn't quite fit on the page. In the corner, a heart was drawn backwards, the way little kids do. A memory rushed in. Graceland, summer of 1974. Lisa Marie lying on the carpet, legs kicking in the air while she scribbled with crayons. "It's you, Daddy," she'd said, eyes glowing. "And me singing with you." He'd laughed then, told her maybe someday. Now, 2 years later, that someday felt far away. The distance between fame and family had never seemed wider. Charlie's voice broke through. "Boss, you okay?" Elvis blinked. "Yeah." "Charlie, just thinking." Charlie stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Crowd's getting restless. Want me to stall?" Elvis shook his head. "No. They waited long enough." He slipped the paper back into his jacket but paused. Something in him resisted letting it go. His fingers stayed pressed against it. He whispered under his breath, "She trusted me with this." For a man worshipped by millions, it was strange how one tiny piece of paper could make him feel small and real again. He looked at the clock. 9:12 p.m. show start was already 7 minutes late. The orchestra leader gave a nervous glance toward the curtains. Stagehands moved in quick bursts. The air smelled of sweat, dust, and perfume from the crowd beyond. Elvis adjusted his collar, straightened his shoulders, and tried to summon the same fire that had carried him for 20 years. But his mind stayed with Lisa's voice, that soft southern drawl calling him Daddy through the phone when she was just learning to read. He had promised he'd be home more often. He hadn't kept that promise. And now her voice seemed to echo in his mind like a ghost between the notes. "Maybe this is her way of reminding me who I am," he thought. The band struck a few test chords. The muffled roar of the audience rose again. The curtains shuddered slightly in the draft. He took one last look at the drawing, smiled faintly, and whispered, "You're with me tonight, baby girl." He walked toward the light. Each step felt heavier and clearer at the same time. Then something strange happened. He stopped halfway down the hallway. His body froze like a wire had been cut. He turned to Charlie and said quietly, "Hold the intro." Charlie frowned. "Hold it? They're already rolling E." Elvis's tone sharpened. "I said hold it." The orchestra stumbled to a halt. Confused murmurs spread backstage. Elvis took a deep breath, touched the pocket over his heart, and said, "There's something I gotta do first." He turned back toward the microphone stand waiting just behind the curtain. In that moment, he wasn't thinking about choreography, cameras, or reviews, only about a little girl's drawing and the truth it carried. He knew that if he went out there pretending nothing had changed, the moment would be lost forever. The crowd roared again, unaware that the man about to walk out was no longer the one they'd expected. He straightened his back, nodded to the bandleader, and whispered one last line to himself. "Let's make her proud." What would you have done if your child's voice reached you through a folded page? Ignored it, or let it lead you? The curtain trembled like a living thing. A stagehand counted down, 3, 2. Elvis stepped into the blinding light. 20,000 people rose as one. The sound hit him like thunder. Cheers, camera flashes, the heat of stage lamps washing over his face. Normally, this was where he came alive, but tonight felt different. He could still feel the folded paper against his chest. The orchestra launched into the opening bars of "You Gave Me a Mountain." He didn't move. For a second, no one noticed. Then, as the intro continued without his voice, the crowd started to shift. Whispers spread across the hall. Elvis held up a hand. "Stop!" The words sliced through the music. The instruments faded one by one, until only the hum of the amplifiers filled the air. The audience fell silent. He stepped closer to the mic, the spotlight following him like a slow breath. His voice, soft but steady, rolled through the quiet. "Folks, I found something tonight. Something my little girl made for me a long time ago." He reached into his pocket. The paper rustled. He unfolded it with shaking hands, holding it up under the lights. Gasps rippled across the crowd. From the balcony, flashes from cameras popped like lightning. "This right here," he said, "was drawn by my daughter, Lisa Marie. She gave it to me before I left for tour. I guess I tucked it away and forgot it was here." He smiled faintly. The paper trembled between his fingers. "She drew me singing, and her watching," said, "so I can be there even when I can't." A soft murmur moved through the audience. Not noise, but emotion. Even the brass section wiped at their eyes. Charlie Hodge, standing at the edge of the curtain, whispered to a bandmate, "He's never done this before." Elvis looked down at the drawing one last time, then back at the crowd. "You know, sometimes, we chase the biggest stages in the world, and forget the smallest gifts waiting in our pocket." His words echoed through the Hilton like a prayer. Then he did something no one expected. He folded the paper once more, pressed it against his heart, and whispered into the mic, "This one's for Lisa." The band leader hesitated, then lifted his hand. The orchestra came back in, soft, uncertain. The crowd stayed silent. Not a single person spoke. Then, slowly, Elvis began to sing. The first line of "You Gave Me a Mountain" came out low and trembling. By the second line, his voice grew stronger, deep, aching, human. The audience could feel every word. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was confession. A woman in the third row covered her mouth. A man near the aisle dropped his camera. People weren't watching a legend. They were watching a father find his heart. The song swelled to its final verse. Elvis's voice cracked. He didn't hide it. He let it break. When he finished, there was no applause, just stunned silence. Then, all at once, the entire room rose to its feet. Tears, cheers, applause that shook the ceiling. But Elvis didn't bow. He simply closed his eyes, whispered something no one could hear, and walked off stage. What would you have done? Kept the show perfect or let the truth break it open? The band kept playing, but something inside that showroom had changed. For years, fans had seen Elvis as untouchable, larger than life, a legend in rhinestones. But tonight, as his voice cracked over the microphone, they saw the man underneath. Every lyric felt heavier. Every breath sounded like a confession. The orchestra moved cautiously, following his lead as if they were holding something fragile together. "You gave me a mountain this time, Lord." His words carried pain, but also gratitude. The lights glowed golden against the mist forming in the air. Sweat, stage haze, tears. It was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. In the front row, a woman whispered, "He's singing like he's saying goodbye." Her husband reached for her hand. "Just listen." Behind the curtain, Charlie Hodge stood motionless. He'd seen hundreds of Elvis shows, but never this. The crowd wasn't cheering anymore. They were crying. Somewhere near the mixing desk, a young sound tech hit record on a reel-to-reel tape machine. The tiny wheels began to spin. That recording would later be whispered about as the lost Hilton tape. When the song reached the bridge, Elvis closed his eyes and let the music take over. Short breaths, a long pause, then a whisper, "That was for you, baby." The entire hall froze. You could hear the hum of the amplifiers, the soft squeak of a chair, a single cough that felt out of place. Then came the final note, long, trembling, raw. He held it until his face went red. Then silence. No movement. No applause. Just 20,000 people staring at a man who'd just laid his soul bare on stage. Finally, someone stood. Then another. Then everyone. A standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Tears rolled down cheeks. Even the security guards looked shaken. Backstage, Jerry Chef muttered, "He didn't just sing that song. He lived it tonight." Elvis walked off slowly, eyes wet, chest heaving. He kept one hand pressed to his pocket. The drawing. It was still there, safe. Charlie caught his arm. You okay?" Elvis nodded, barely. "Yeah. Just realized something." "What's that?" He looked back toward the stage, where the crowd was still on its feet. "Sometimes you gotta lose the show to find yourself." He smiled weakly, then handed Charlie the microphone. His hand was trembling. A stagehand offered a towel. Elvis waved it off. He walked past everyone, straight to his dressing room. The cheers outside grew even louder as he closed the door behind him. Inside, the silence was deafening. He sat down, pulled the drawing out again, and laid it on the table under the harsh dressing room light. Crayon lines, tiny hearts, a father and daughter holding hands. He whispered, "You brought me back tonight, honey." The mirror in front of him reflected a man who looked both broken and reborn. He folded the drawing once more and slipped it into his Bible, right between the pages of Psalms. Outside, the applause still roared. But he didn't need to hear it, because for the first time in years he felt seen. And somewhere in that roaring crowd, someone whispered, "That's not a concert anymore. That's a man coming home." What would you have felt, sitting there that night, watching a legend strip away his crown to show you his heart? The next morning, the newspapers didn't quite know what to call it. Some wrote, "Elvis breaks down in Vegas." Others said, "A father's song stops time." But fans didn't care about headlines. They cared about what they'd felt. Bootleg tapes of the show began circulating within days. Scratchy audio, muffled crowd, but clear enough to hear one thing. Elvis's voice trembling as he said, "This one's for Lisa." People replayed it again and again. Some claimed they could even hear him whisper her name at the end, just before the crowd erupted. The story spread. Letters began arriving at Graceland from all over the world. Parents sent photos and drawings their children had made. Kids mailed handwritten notes that said things like, "For my daddy too." By February 1977, there were thousands of them, stacked in boxes near the piano room. Fans started calling them the Lisa letters. Charlie Hodge remembered walking into the music room one afternoon and finding Elvis sitting on the floor, surrounded by envelopes. He was smiling softly, reading them one by one. "She did that," Elvis said. "All from one drawing." That same week, he framed Lisa's original picture and hung it above his piano. Every morning, before touching a single key, he'd look up at it and say quietly, "Morning, baby girl." The people closest to him said something shifted after that night. He rehearsed less, rested more. He started calling Lisa every day, even if it was just for 5 minutes. And when reporters asked about his next big tour, he smiled and said, "I've already had the show of my life." At Graceland, fans began leaving their own drawings by the front gate. Crayon sketches, stick figures, scribbled hearts. The groundskeepers started collecting them in a box near the entrance. To outsiders, it looked like a fad. To those who'd seen the Hilton performance or even just heard it, it felt like a movement. A fan named Maria wrote in her diary that year, "He made us remember our own fathers. He made us want to call them again." That diary was found decades later in a memorabilia shop in Memphis, still pressed with a faded photo of Elvis holding a child's drawing on stage. And though he would only live another 8 months, that moment seemed to echo through everything he did afterward. His final concerts carried a new tenderness. His laughter came easier. His voice, though weaker, carried warmth instead of pain. People close to him noticed he never went on stage without touching his jacket pocket first. They said it became a ritual, a silent promise to never forget what mattered most. Years later, when fans toured Graceland after his passing, they saw it too. The framed drawing, still hanging above the piano. The colors had faded a little, but the words remained. "Love you, Daddy." And just below it, on a small bronze plaque added by the estate, were these words, "The night love spoke louder than music." Even now, some visitors say the air in that room feels different, softer somehow, like the house itself remembers. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not what you leave behind, but who still feels you after you're gone. Would you have sent your own letter if you'd seen that moment live? Years passed, but that single sheet of paper, drawn in crayon by a little girl, outlived the spotlight. It hung quietly above the piano at Graceland, framed in soft gold, light from the window brushing across it every morning. Visitors still stop and stare at it. Some cry without knowing why, because that drawing doesn't just show a father and daughter. It shows the moment the man behind the legend finally came home to himself. When Lisa Marie grew older, she spoke softly about that night. "Daddy always kept my drawing close," she said in one interview. He said it reminded him of what the songs were really for. It wasn't about fame anymore, or applause, or gold records. It was about love that never fades, even when the music does. Some nights, when the lights dimmed at Graceland's annual vigil, fans swore they could hear a faint hum from the old piano room. A low note, like someone brushing the keys. Others said it was just the wind, but everyone who stood there could feel it. That warmth, that silence, that heartbeat. The Lisa letters still arrive to this day. They come from people who never met Elvis at all. Fathers and daughters, mothers and sons, strangers who felt something real in that old bootleg recording. Some send them from as far as Japan and Brazil. The Graceland staff collects them in the same wooden chest near the gates. The top drawer is labeled 1976, the Hilton Night. One letter stands out, written decades later by a fan named Thomas who attended that very concert. His note reads, "When Elvis stopped the show that night, I stopped pretending my own family didn't matter. I went home. I hugged my daughter. That's what he gave me." It's hard to imagine a louder legacy than that. Sometimes, legends are remembered for what they sang. But Elvis, in that single moment, was remembered for what he felt. The crowd at the Hilton may have heard a song, but they also witnessed something greater, a man rediscovering the reason he ever sang at all. Even today, when the old tape plays on YouTube, people pause at the same line, "This one's for Lisa." And somewhere between that whisper and the silence that followed, you can almost feel time pause again, just like it did that night in Las Vegas. He didn't know that his life would end less than a year later. He didn't know that drawing would become his quietest legacy. But maybe deep down he didn't need to, because every time he sang after that night, you could hear her in his voice. Maybe that's the real truth. Love doesn't need an encore. It just needs to be remembered. And the little crayon drawing, folded once, worn with years, tucked into a jacket pocket, still whispers the same message through time. Love you, Daddy. If this story touched you, share it with someone who still keeps an old memory close to their heart. Because sometimes, it's not the songs or the fame that last forever. It's the love we leave folded in a pocket, waiting to be found again.